Thank you for being with us, Harry Potter fans. We are continuing on with the new chapter for Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always, by Dead Woodpecker. We're at Chapter 30, Interlude, Molly Weasley.
Chapter 30, Interlude, Molly Weasley. Chapter text, Molly Weasley. We have to go to Dumbledore with this, Bill said. Molly stared around at her family. Bill's face was set and white. His girlfriend Fleur gripped his hand tightly. Charlie was pretending to darn a balaclava, but Molly knew that her son was just as frightened as she was. Her twins were serious for once. There was no laughter at all on their faces, only the sort of fear that made them look older than their 18 years. Only Percy seemed almost relaxed. "Arthur," she said quietly. "Bill's right," he said. "Dumbledore really is the only person we can trust, you know. Even if he doesn't believe us, he'll listen. We'll send him an owl," Bill said. "Immediately. We can't just sit on this any longer." Charlie rose quickly. "We'll use Hermes," he said. "He'll get there faster than Errol." "Don't say anything important," Fred said. "That Umbridge woman is watching the owls. We know she is." "We'll just ask him about Ron and Ginny," Charlie said. "Nothing at all strange about that. Merlin knows we've been pretty loud about wanting to find them." He scrawled out a note and then read it aloud to the entire family. Within minutes, Hermes was winging his way to Hogwarts, to Albus Dumbledore. No, Molly thought, seeing that her youngest son and daughter were still gone. Not the entire family. Not for the first time. She wondered if they were dead. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Ron's and Ginny's hands sat firmly at mortal peril, where they had been since the morning after that horrible row, and she had found their beds empty and cold. The trial of the century was over, and Molly could only feel relief that her family had not been dragged into it even more than it already had been. It had been the right decision. Insisting that Ron and Ginny stay away from Harry Potter had protected Molly's family in ways that she had half expected. Still, she felt terrible for poor Sirius Black, who had already lost so much. The anguish in his voice had followed her all the way home. 4 of her sons and her daughter waited in the sitting room, obviously waiting to hear the verdict. "What happened, Mom?" Percy asked quietly. "He's been given a life sentence to Azkaban," Arthur said tiredly. He looked just as relieved as Molly felt. Things could have been so much worse. It could have been Ron and Ginny under the Imperius curse. Percy shook his head, looking rather dazed. "I just can't believe it. I always thought Harry was a decent sort." Molly glanced at her daughter. Ginny had her head in her hands, and she was squeezing hanks of her long hair in her hands. Molly did not think that a boy who would intimately touch a 12-year-old was a decent sort. It made her furious just to think about it. "Well," she said, making an effort to keep her voice steady, "I'm sure they'll find him soon, and then it'll be over." Ron muttered something under his breath. "What was that, dear?" She smiled, reaching over to pat his shoulder. Poor Ron. It must be terribly difficult for him to have his former best friend turn out to be dark. "Nothing," Ron said. Molly set about preparing dinner for her family, while Arthur went into greater detail about what had happened at the trial. She was extremely grateful that the children were not allowed inside the court. Perhaps Ron and Ginny would have been called to testify that would have hurt them so badly. Though it was possible they might have spoken for Harry, as Augusta and Zeno had. "I just don't know what those two were thinking," Molly thought grimly. "Mom," Fred said, "is dinner ready?" "Just a moment, dear," Molly said. She used her wand to send the knives, chopping the carrots, and, with a flourish, sent a creamy sauce over the noodles. Arthur levitated the plates and silverware over to the table, and they all sat down. She watched Ron and Ginny closely. They only picked at their food and kept glancing at each other out the corner of their eyes. She was about to say something when Arthur did it for her. "I can imagine how you must be feeling." "No, you can't," Ginny said sharply. "We can," Molly assured her. They could speak later about how Ginny was not to use that tone when addressing her parents, no matter how hard she tried. "I had a cousin who joined the Death Eaters. We were of an age, and I thought I knew him quite well. And he was there that night when your uncles died. Ginny, my dearest, we know what betrayal feels like." "You think I don't?" Ginny shouted. Her face was bright red. "Maybe I think that the entire wizarding world is betraying Harry, and so are you." "Ginny," Arthur said, How can you possibly say that? He used unforgivable curses. He's been evading the ministry. Ginny's nostrils flared and her lips were white. Molly stared, almost fascinated by the rage on her daughter's face. They never confirmed that he used more than one unforgivable, Ginny said. Still, Molly said, the use of just one requires a life sentence to Azkaban. You are far too young to understand this, which is why I am making allowance for your tone, young lady, but the Imperius curse is a horrible thing. It is undetectable, and even when good people are put under it, they can be forced to do horrible things. That doesn't sound too hard to understand, Ron put in. Molly could not quite place his tone, but she did not like it. She knew that Ron and Ginny must be feeling horribly betrayed, but it was not advisable to let them continue. They would need to face this sooner or later, and something is truly heart-wrenching, as this would only get worse the longer they ignored it. Don't speak to your mother that way, Arthur said. Percy, Molly said. Fred, George, I want you to go to your rooms. Now. Molly stared at her two youngest while the others filed silently out of the kitchen. She did not fully understand why both of them were glaring at opposite walls with such defiance. Didn't they realize that she was only trying to help? She was trying to protect them? The Imperius curse. We know what it does, Ginny said. But no one even bothered asking why Harry did it, did they? What if he had a good reason? There is no good reason for it, Arthur said firmly. None at all. Ron snorted. Molly felt it like a physical blow. Her son just laughed at them. Ron's long, lanky body was stretched out in his chair. He looked entirely relaxed. This seemed so wrong. She could not believe that her son was taking this so lightly, that she felt as though she were looking at a complete stranger. She traded glances with Arthur, and she saw that her husband feared the same thing. I am very disappointed in you, young man, Arthur said quietly. Ron jerked as though he had been struck. Very. I don't know where we went wrong when we raised you, but the fact that you consider the use of an unforgivable to be funny is against everything your mother and I stand for. I don't think it's funny, Ron said. I just think that it's pretty hypocritical of you to say that, Dad. The Ministry used it loads of times in the last war. That was different, Arthur said. Ron and Ginny exchanged glances. Both of them appeared to be clenching their fists. Harry Potter is not a Ministry employee, Molly said. He's obviously a very confused and disturbed young man. Don't say another word, Ginny said through gritted teeth. Ginevra Weasley, Arthur yelled. Even Molly jumped. She could not remember the last time Arthur had raised his voice to one of the children. Do not make me silence you. You might as well, Ginny said, unafraid. You're obviously not listening to anything I'm saying. I trust that Harry had a good reason. Harry Potter is not to be trusted. Arthur bellowed. I've known it for ages. He's only proven it time and again. Ron stood up so suddenly that his chair went flying backward. You know what I think he's proven time and again, Dad? The fact that he'd do anything to save people. What if I told you he? Ron, Ginny said so quietly that Molly could barely hear her. Don't. That's enough, Molly said. Go to your rooms. Both of you. You're both going to have a good, long think about whom and what you're defending. Do not make the mistake of choosing to side with Harry, Arthur added. And you stay in your rooms until your mother and I come to get you. Without another word, Ron and Ginny left the kitchen. Molly fairly gasped for breath. What had happened to her little girl who loved sunshine and flying on a broom? And the son who used to be so insecure about being the youngest son? Where had her babies gone? She asked herself that same question when she entered Ginny's room the next morning. Arthur was the one who found the note that read, We've chosen Harry. You should too. She put her face in her hands. Arthur's hand came up to stroke her back. She allowed herself to cry, but only for a few moments. I expect we'll be waiting a while, she said. I'll make us dinner. He might not even reply tonight. She found solace in cooking. She always had. There was nothing that Molly Weasley loved more than ensuring that her family was fed and well cared for. I hope they're eating all right, wherever they are, she thought. She ignored the fact that a few tears spilled into the soup she was making. Her family was silent throughout the meal. Molly found herself watching anxiously out the window for another owl, even though she knew that there was no way that even Hermes could reach Hogwarts It would take a few hours, at least. Night stretched on. Molly felt sick to her stomach with fear and worry. The meal she had eaten sat in her stomach like a rock. The burrow was unnaturally quiet. "I think we should try to go to bed," she finally said at midnight. "It'll have to wait until—" But she was interrupted by a bright burst of flame, and Dumbledore's phoenix appeared in the center of the room. He dropped a note in the middle of the floor. Arthur started to reach for it when there was another blast of heat, and the phoenix disappeared again. "What does it say, Arthur?" she whispered. Word flew to his office. He said simply, "Right now." They were galvanized into motion. Molly lifted her wand and summoned traveling cloaks enough for all of them. They gathered around the hearth, still fastening them underneath their chins. Molly knew that they must look a fright. All of them were rumpled and sleep-deprived. But she couldn't stretch herself to care about that for once. Dumbledore would understand. "I'll go first," Arthur said. He stepped into the flames, shouted "Hogwarts, Headmaster's office," and whirled away. Molly waited several breaths before she followed. Arthur dusted himself off, and she did the same. Bill came next and almost knocked her over. "Sorry, Mum," he murmured. Fleur followed next. Within minutes, Percy, Charlie, Fred, and George arrived. It was only then that Molly looked around and found Dumbledore seated behind his desk, staring at them. "Good evening," he said pleasantly, as if he often entertained disheveled guests at this hour of the night. They greeted him. Molly gazed around the room, trying to prolong the moment. The portraits were all awake and appeared to be avidly interested in what was happening. She wished there weren't so many of them. "None of you move," Dumbledore said. Molly jolted before she realized that it was to the portraits that Dumbledore spoke. One of them snorted and rolled his eyes. Apparently, he had little respect for the current headmaster. "You wish to speak to me about your son and daughter?" Molly licked her lips. "Well, in a manner of speaking. We didn't know how else to get you to grant us an audience," Arthur said. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. "Oh, strange things have been happening," Bill said. "And we don't have anyone else to turn to. Actually, we know. My brothers told me," Molly began, and felt a little stab of anguish at the thought of Gideon and Fabian. What if Ron and Ginny had already met But she didn't let herself finish the thought. "That you were once the head of the Order of the Phoenix." "That is correct," Dumbledore said. "I take it you are here to ask me to begin it once again in opposition to Harry Potter." Molly bit her lip. None of the other members of her family said anything. He surveyed them calmly. "It must be difficult for you, as your son and daughter are in league with him." Several of the portraits on the walls coughed. One opened his mouth to speak, but Dumbledore shot at a quelling look. Molly's heart was galloping in her chest. What if he dismissed their concerns simply because they were family? "No," she said. I don't want you to—" But she couldn't continue. Dumbledore looked genuinely shocked for a moment before he leaned back in his chair. Something shifted in the room, though Molly had no idea what. The portraits were staring at her even more than ever. She felt herself flush under the scrutiny. She straightened herself up. "I suppose we'd better begin at the beginning. It all started, really, when we had a row with Ron and Ginny. They've always been friendly with Harry Potter, since the moment we met them. We had concerns, as you know, but they're both very stubborn. Then they disappeared, leaving a note that they'd gone to wherever Harry Potter went after he left. I am the chief warlock on the Wisingamot," he said gently. "I heard your testimony. You said that you think he'd bewitched them. You suspected that he used the Imperius curse upon them, as he did to Cedric Diggory. And we did," Molly said. "We really did. You have to admit that he's done some very suspicious things. Everyone knows that he used that curse." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "There is no denying that he did so. But you no longer believe that he used it upon your children? You think now that they are with him willingly." There was a sudden chill in the air, and Molly wrapped her cloak around herself more tightly. "Yes," Bill said. "We do." Dumbledore sighed and rose from his chair. Molly knew that they were about to be dismissed. "Thank you for this information. I know it must be difficult for you." "Wait," Arthur said. He sounded a bit desperate. "That isn't really why we're here. I mean, it is. But we have more to tell you." "The entire country went mad while I was in Romania," Charlie said. "I came back the day before Augusta Longbottom and Zeno Lovegood were murdered, and the Granger couple was discovered missing. And everyone blamed Harry Potter. Arthur put in. We were pulled off all our regular jobs at the ministry, and we were all given the task of finding him and putting him on trial. Like my son said, Molly said, it was complete madness. And for a while we were swept away in it. I'll be the first to admit that. But once things settled a little, we started to actually think about it. The full weight of Dumbledore's stare was on her now. And, he said, we found a little funny that we weren't killed too, Arthur said. It isn't a secret that Harry Potter's closest friends were related to Augusta and Zeno. That's what put the suspicion on him, as I'm sure you know. Many suspected that he killed them to tighten the control he had over them. I'm aware of this, Dumbledore said. Explain to me why you find it odd that you weren't killed. Because he didn't have a reason to hurt Augusta and Zeno, Molly explained. They didn't, by all accounts, they liked him. And we didn't. And he never tried to bewitch us into liking him. He could have taken away our wills. And you feel that because you have been quite vocal about your distrust for him, that if anyone were to be targeted, it would be you? Dumbledore asked. He was so calm, so unflappable, that Molly felt a momentary urge to shake him. That if Potter was really the monster that the Ministry believes him to be, you and your entire family would be dead? Yes, Arthur said. And that isn't the only odd thing, Bill said. I had to go out of the country on Gringotts business right after they were killed. When I came home and visited the burrow, I noticed that there were very powerful wards around it. I didn't think anything of it until Dad asked me if I would set some up for him. I didn't set up any of the wards, Arthur said. And I initially thought that the Ministry had, but when I talked to Rufus Scrimgeour about it, he said that it wasn't anything they'd done. What kind of wards were these? Dumbledore asked. Subtle ones, Bill answered promptly. We never would have noticed if I hadn't caught sight of one. It's taken months of research for me to even be able to name them. But Dumbledore, they're blood wards, which means it had to have been keyed by a member of the Weasley family, and it wasn't any of us. So it had to be either Ron or Ginny. Do you think they may have done this in order to protect you from Harry Potter? Molly felt uncertain all of a sudden. What if he didn't believe them? He seemed determined to point his finger at Harry Potter at every turn. No, Arthur said. Dad, Charlie said. We have to tell him everything, lay it all out for him. You have my full attention, Dumbledore nodded. Whatever it is you have to say, I am listening. I'm sure you have heard of my attack. Arthur asked. The Ministry had us on a rotating system, guarding the door to the Department of Mysteries. They didn't tell us why. I'm the one who suggested this, Dumbledore said. Well, Arthur said, we think that we were guarding the prophecy. It is a well-known fact that that department studies prophecies and the like. So, did you think that Harry Potter would attempt to retrieve it? I thought it a possibility, Dumbledore said. I was guarding the door one night, and the snake attacked out of nowhere, Arthur said. I had fallen asleep. I woke up to find myself being bitten again and again. I thought I was going to die, but someone saved me. My glasses had fallen, and I can't see anything without them. But someone with black hair healed me enough so that I did not die. I don't remember anything after that, but someone with black hair? Dumbledore asked. Surely you aren't suggesting that it was Harry Potter who saved you? Molly felt a rush of disorientation. She remembered sitting in here, accusing Harry Potter of opening the Chamber of Secrets and possibly murdering her daughter and son. How odd that she was now attempting to defend him from the man who had been so sure that he could not do such a thing. I think it was, Arthur said. I can't be certain, of course. We don't have any solid proof. It's all rather circumstantial. Not all of it. Fred spoke up unexpectedly. Professor, we know Neville Longbottom. We also know his history and what happened to his parents. He wouldn't side with the wizard who helped the Lestranges go free any more than I'd eat flobberworms. But I think it's insane. Neville would never help the Death Eater that tortured his parents into insanity go free, George said firmly. That's what really put us off to the way the world's gone mad. Dumbledore did not say anything for so long that Molly began to grow even more afraid. If he stopped listening now, it is a common belief that Mr. Longbottom and Miss Lovegood severed ties with Potter after the murder of their parents. Tell him about that map. Molly ordered her twins. Right, Fred said, looking uncomfortable. Well, we had this map, you see, of Hogwarts. It showed where everyone was, and where all the secret passageways were George put in. It went missing back in our 5th year. We thought Potter taken it, actually, because it was right after he messed around with Ginny. And he knew we'd be watching him, Fred said. We didn't see it until the first day of term last year, George said. But then it was lying under Fred's pillow. How extraordinary, Dumbledore murmured. We think Neville put it there, Fred informed him. He was seen coming out of the dorm by one of our year mates. We asked him about it, but he said he had no idea what we were talking about. We think he was lying, George said. And Neville's been up to something all year, even before he disappeared. He used to be really shy. But he started making loads of friends in the other houses, Fred said. We watch him on the map, he admitted. We thought he was acting fishy. And did you see him do anything fishy? Dumbledore asked. That's the thing, George said. He and a bunch of other students would disappear off the map for hours at a time. We couldn't rumble how they were leaving. That is very odd, Dumbledore said. Do you believe he was up to anything nefarious? No, Fred shook his head firmly. Not at all. He and Luna always stand up to Umbridge. No offense, George said. But she's horrible. And she was using a blood quill on Neville, Fred said. We heard him talking about it with Dean Thomas. He said that she was trying to get Potter's whereabouts from him. And then Dean asked if he'd told her. And Neville said that no matter how many times she made him cut his own hand, he wouldn't tell her where he was or what he was up to. Dean said that he'd better not, George finished. You've come to me with a school-wide conspiracy to protect Harry Potter. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. No, Molly heard herself shout. That isn't why we've come. We think that. But she was still so afraid, she couldn't bring herself to say it. Allow me to attempt to piece together what you were saying, Dumbledore said. You believe that Harry Potter might be protecting you. You no longer believe that he is as criminal as you originally thought. You believe that your son and daughter are with him by choice. You do not believe that he was the one to murder Augusta Longbottom and Zeno Lovegood. You also do not believe that he was responsible for the mass breakout of Azkaban. You, Arthur, believe that he saved your life. Yes, Molly said in a small voice. That's what we're saying. One of the portraits made a rude noise. Molly thought it might have been the same one who had snorted earlier, but she could not be sure. Enough, Phineas, Dumbledore said. Do you have any theories as to who killed Augusta Longbottom and Zeno Lovegood? Molly closed her eyes. We think, she whispered, we think it was you-know-who. We think he who must not be named is back. It's the only explanation that makes sense, Arthur said quickly. We know it's a wild theory, Bill said, but no one knows what really happened that night when you-know-who killed the Potters and tried to kill Harry. I believe that you yourself have always said that he'd come back someday. I did, Dumbledore said. I have to confess to some surprise that you have come to this conclusion. It has been apparent to me for quite some time that you distrust Harry Potter. I didn't. Percy spoke for the first time since they had arrived. I admit that the fact that he used an unforgivable curse threw me for a while. But Harry threw himself in front of a curse for me. The Cruciatus Curse, in fact, as I'm sure you remember. I remember, Dumbledore said. I also remember that you too, Molly, Arthur, have been as frightened as the terrible power he has professed to have as the rest of the wizarding world. And Molly had to admit that she still was. The idea of it frightened her a great deal. But she was more frightened of losing her children to you-know-who, just as she had lost her brothers. We're more frightened of you-know-who, Arthur said, echoing her thoughts. Dumbledore stared at Molly, and then her husband, and then her sons, and then Fleur so intensely that Molly felt like her soul had been laid bare. She was sure that the others felt the same. What, Dumbledore began, do you intend to do? We want to help them, of course, Charlie said loudly. If it's you-know-who, then he's after Harry Potter. And if he's after him, then my brother and sister are in danger. We have a clock, Molly said through numb lips, that shows us where everyone in the family is at. It has work and school and home and traveling on it, but Ron's and Ginny's hands aren't pointed at any of those. They're pointed at mortal peril, and we intend to help them, Arthur said firmly when Molly's voice trailed away. Just to be clear, Dumbledore said, Molly had the feeling that he was pushing them toward something, though she did not know what. How could they state it any clearer than that? You're choosing to align yourself with Harry Potter? You trust that he is, indeed, on the right side? Yes, Molly managed with a shaky voice. A year ago, she would have said that she would never stand before Albus Dumbledore and claim that she trusted Harry Potter. Not even a few months ago. But she could not ignore the facts, and she hoped that Dumbledore did not either. All of you? Yes, said Arthur. Yes, chorused all of her sons and Fleur. Molly did not know how it had happened that Fleur Delacour had gained a place with her family, but it seemed only right to have her here. She took her eyes off Fleur and brought them back to Dumbledore. He seemed quite pleased about something, not at all appropriate in the situation. He stood up rather abruptly, wrote something hastily on a scrap of parchment, gave it to the Phoenix, and murmured something in too low a voice for Molly to hear. Her heart started pounding rather abruptly. Was he telling the Ministry? Were they about to be handed over to them? He grabbed what looked like a metal bowl with strange runes around the lip out of the cupboard. Molly could only watch, feeling more confused by the moment, as he bustled around. Professor, what? George began. Not now, Mr. Weasley, Dumbledore said. Now listen to me. We're going to number 12, Grimmauld Place. Repeat that after me, and then use the flu to get there. Number 12, Grimmauld Place, Molly and her family repeated. After you, he said. Molly was the last of her family to leave the same way they had come. She caught a last glimpse of Dumbledore. He was beaming at the portraits, and the portraits had started to cheer. Before she could think about this oddity, she felt herself whisked away through the flames. She found herself in a large kitchen. The other members of her family stared around at it. They looked just as bewildered as she felt. What the hell? Bill said blankly. Molly could not even bring herself to admonish him for cursing. Several things happened at once. Dumbledore stepped out of the flue, and Molly heard her daughter yell Ron at the top of her voice. She was not in the dark kitchen, and she sounded quite far away. But that was Ginny's voice, her little girl. That is disgusting. Ginny yelled again. For a moment, Molly simply could not move. The rest of her family was equally frozen. She whirled on Dumbledore. You knew? You knew. And you didn't. I can't believe you didn't tell us. Excuse me for a moment. Dumbledore ignored her. He was looking concerned and distracted while he stared at the ceiling. I believe they might need a warning. No, Molly said. I'm going up right now. Dumbledore, I simply can't believe. But she interrupted herself by fleeing the kitchen, her family on her heels. She followed the sound of voices and loud laughter. Her babies sounded so happy. A low voice, Molly was certain that it was Harry's, said something that Molly just didn't understand. She could not possibly have heard what she thought she heard. And then she heard Ron say, quite clearly, no wonder why Voldemort's so cranky. He's a virgin. Molly stopped dead in her tracks. She had never heard you-know-who spoken of so irreverently. She glanced around, heart racing, feeling quite as though the Dark Wizard would jump out at them and attack her son. But the only thing that happened was a burst of raucous, immoderate laughter issuing from behind the open door to the room only a few feet away. Molly, Dumbledore said. She ignored him and followed the sound of her children's voices. She hadn't seen them for so long. She ought to have known that Ron, Ginny, and Harry were not the only ones at Grimmauld Place. If Dumbledore had known, who else knew? She had her answer when she stepped into the room. Sirius Black had her arm around Ron's shoulder and was ruffling his hair with the other hand. Severus Snape sat in the corner, his lips twitching. Hermione Granger, who had not been smuggled out of the country for her own safety, apparently, sat on the floor, leaning up against her son's legs. Neville Longbottom was laughing so hard that he appeared to be unable to breathe. Luna Lovegood, however, stared straight at Molly, an inscrutable expression on her face. And Ginny sat on Harry's lap, and she was gazing down at him with such a look of tenderness and affection that Molly's heart was pierced with the truth that her daughter was in love with Harry Potter. And it was as deep and as real as what Molly felt for Arthur. She gasped. Harry turned to look at her, and the laughing look on his face was swiftly replaced by one of utter shock. He looked from her to Arthur and the rest of the family. His mouth was slightly open. Ginny, sensing the tension, turned as well. Molly could only stare at her. She looked so different, She seemed so much older, as if it had been 5 years since Molly had seen her instead of 9 months. "They've chosen Harry," Dumbledore said quietly. He had followed them from the kitchen without Molly even noticing it. Molly saw a flash of pure, fierce joy in Harry's green eyes. It made her stagger, and Arthur gripped her elbow to steady her. But she watched that emotion fade away into something colder. His mouth hardened, and the room seemed to grow colder. "What the bloody hell?" Ron shouted. He had risen halfway to his feet, knocking Hermione over in the process. "Sorry, Hermione. What the bloody hell are you lot doing here?" Molly had spent a great deal of time and energy in the last few months preparing for this meeting. She had been very afraid that she would see that stranger she had glimpsed in her son off and on throughout the last 5 years. But Ron, he was Ron. He looked confused and angry and hurt, and as much as Molly regretted the fact she had obviously hurt him quite a lot during that row, but she was glad that his eyes were angry and not cold. "What do you mean they've chosen?" Ginny said. Her voice was icy and calm. Molly turned her eyes to her daughter. Ginny steadfastly refused to return her look. Her jaw was clenched tight. "They've chosen," Dumbledore repeated. "They came to my office tonight and told me they thought that Voldemort had returned, and they wished to help." "It's a bit late, don't you think?" Harry asked. "Bully for them, though. I don't think I've ever been more surprised in my life. I thought they'd come face to face with Voldemort and still accuse their own children of being evil." He looked around, as if expecting someone to stop him. But Ron and Ginny said nothing. Hermione Granger, Neville Longbottom, and Sirius Black were stony-faced and silent. Snape had an inscrutable look on his face, and Luna Lovegood merely watched as if she found the proceedings mildly interesting. Molly opened and closed her mouth, but she could not think of anything to say. Words had deserted her. "Now listen," Bill said angrily. "You couldn't have expected us to know or to trust." "That is my point," Harry shouted. His cheeks were flushed from more than the fire whiskey he had consumed, and his black hair stood on end. "Look around. You see these people? They didn't let any fucking articles turn them away before they even met me. And you," he pointed at Molly and Arthur. It felt like a malediction. "Ought to have trusted your children. They'd." Molly began helplessly. The young man who stood before her was livid, but underneath the rage was a deep well of pain that she could not even begin to understand. "They've changed. Not to mention what you did to our sister," Charlie put in. He had the strongest temper of all Molly's sons, and she had expected him to step in before this, though she fervently wished that he would remain silent. "Don't think that just because I know Voldemort's back, I've forgotten that." Harry sneered. "I'm surprised you've forgotten my terrible fucking power." "What? Not worried that I'm going to, what was it? Lead the family down a dark and dangerous path? Not so afraid that I'm going to bewitch you." "No, we're changing your tune a bit. Try to see it from our perspective," Arthur said. "I have tried," Harry roared. "I've tried for almost 3 years. But the moment you broke your daughter's heart, do you have any idea how many times she's cried herself to sleep because of you?" I stopped understanding. "Harry," Sirius murmured. Molly glanced at Arthur. Her husband looked just as bewildered as she felt, but she had a growing sense of dread that they had made a more dreadful mistake than they had thought. Why was he lashing out at them? And why had her son and daughter moved to stand behind him? She had the feeling that she had walked into something far more complicated than she had ever dreamed. There was a long moment when they all simply stared at one another. Molly felt like she was standing on the edge of a chasm. She and Arthur, Bill and Fleur, Charlie and Percy, and the twins stood on one side, and the others watched them with accusation in their eyes from the other. "What the hell is going on?" Charlie asked. "I think our concerns were legitimate." "You understand nothing," Ginny said. She and Ron looked to Harry. "You want to understand?" he said in a low voice. "Albus." The pensive, the strange bowl was produced and placed upon the table next to 2 empty bottles of fire whiskey. The silence had changed. There was an air of expectation, even one of relief. Molly felt like she was floundering and lost. Harry raised his wand to his temple. He pulled out a long, silvery strand of what looked like lightning, made nearly solid. He flung it into the bowl with a sharp gesture. It made a rather loud slapping sound. He repeated this action. You slap, will slap. Understand, slap, slap. Everything. Harry, Dumbledore murmured. Don't do anything you'll regret. Harry stared at Molly and the rest of the family. Quite deliberately, he added several more silvery strands to the bowl. I can't imagine why I would regret it. Is that a pensieve? Bill asked. What? Just go, Harry ordered. Molly took a deep breath and stepped forward. She poked her head in, and her body followed. There was a rushing sensation in her belly, and she found herself on a scene of devastation. Before she could gasp or scream, her family joined her. Bill shouted, Merlin, when did this happen? What are we seeing? Arthur asked. Harry's memories, Bill said. That silvery stuff was his memories? Fred asked. He was very pale. Molly forced herself to look around. They were at Hogwarts, but that was impossible. It was demolished, destroyed. Bodies were strewn all over the grounds and the steps like broken rag dolls. Blood made the stones a deep, sick red instead of gray. Molly clapped her hand over her mouth. Mum, George said in a strangled voice. Mum, that's me. Molly was about to deny it, but there was no mistaking his pale face and shock of red hair. She flicked her eyes between the dead George and the living. The one that lay at her feet was older. But how? The scene whirled around her, and they were again at Hogwarts. This time they were not surrounded by the dead, but by the living and the dead. Hundreds of bodies lined a flat, marble stone. Molly felt herself inexorably pulled toward it. She wanted to see if she knew anyone else. She heard a low, keening wail. There before her was everyone who stood with her and watched this right now. Including Molly herself, she saw them. Arthur, Percy, Fred, barely recognizable. George, Bill, Charlie, even Fleur. And she noticed another wail and saw where her daughter knelt before the stone. It happened for each of them. Each scene battered Molly's heart a little more, until she could not bear to keep her eyes open, but could not seem to look away. Harry giving the twins the money to start the joke shop. Harry laughing immoderately with the twins. Harry proudly wearing his Weasley sweater, standing and carrying on a cordial conversation with Bill. It wasn't exactly the scenes that he showed them. They weren't earth-shattering, at least not on a physical way. There was no loud declaration of how much they thought of Harry as part of the family. But Molly saw it in the way they looked at him and treated him, and a horrible sense that they had missed out on something essential welled up inside her. Flickers of memory drifted past. Ginny weeping, Ron stony-faced. Another long one. The three of them. It was far in the future. They looked terribly old. Stood before a portrait of Dumbledore. You really think we should wait to tell them? Harry asked. Really? Yes, Dumbledore said. Allow them to make the choice to help you. You are not a god, Harry, to subvert free will. It would be remarkably dangerous. They will have to make their own choice. All of them. Even Molly and Arthur. Harry said. Even Mum and Dad. Ginny echoed. Especially your mother and father, Mrs. Potter. Dumbledore said gravely. Mrs. Potter, Molly jolted, and another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They're married, she thought numbly through a haze of guilt, shame, and grief. He had come back in time to bring them back to life. All three of them. And she had thought the worst things about him. She'd kicked him out of the burrow. No need to worry about that, the older version of Ron said. Mum and Dad will love Harry just as much as they did this time. The memories ended, and Molly found herself rising out of the pensieve and landing on the soft carpet of the sitting room. She was shaking, and she felt ill. She glanced around, not knowing if she could stand to see them. But only Dumbledore, Snape, and Sirius Black remained in the room. They've gone, Sirius said. We have another safe house. Why? Molly whispered. Why didn't? If they just told us. They tried to tell you, Sirius said harshly. They told you every way they knew how that Harry was to be trusted. Harry saved your daughter's life. He took a curse for Percy. Molly fell into a chair. There was a moment's pause, and a glass of tea was placed in her hand. If it is any consolation, Dumbledore said, I think you will regret what he showed you, and how he did it. He is very angry and very hurt. With good reason, Molly said. Everyone else murmured their agreement. After the way the WWA we've been, we deserve a lot worse, Arthur said. A hell of a lot worse, Bill echoed. Everyone nodded their agreement, except Percy, who looked more thoughtful than sad. Dumbledore cocked his head and looked at them. The heartbreak you feel, the shame and guilt, the fact that you feel you deserve some sort of punishment, and the fact that you will hardly be able to look at him and, to a lesser extent, Ginny and Ron. These are the precise reasons why he is going to regret it. Harry stood, knelt beside her. His arms were wrapped around her, and Molly could see quite clearly that his face was screwed up in a grimace of pain that was as mournful as the grieving sounds Ginny made. Molly stood there for a long time, just staring, hardly able to breathe. A loud voice caught her attention. Voldemort is dead. Molly recognized Phileas Flitwick's voice. But the entire flower of a generation has been lost. The price of freedom from tyranny and darkness lies on the marble stone behind me. I would ask you not to forget, but I do not need to. This tragedy will be emblazoned on the minds and hearts of the few of us who survived. The scene shifted again, and Molly found herself standing in the office of the headmaster. The price was too high, Harry said, and the conversation that followed changed Molly's world forever. The Weasley family drew in a deep breath as one, as a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. No, Molly murmured. Her thoughts were disjointed, and she barely understood what was happening. But the fact that her son, daughter, and Harry Potter had traveled back in time penetrated. She found her hand in Arthur's grasp. He was squeezing so tightly it hurt. And then they were in the basement kitchen of this house, Grimmauld Place. She sat alone with Harry Potter, and Molly realized that she had loved him like a son. She saw the look in her own eyes, the faith, the trust, the conviction that he would defeat you-know-who. I've never doubted, Molly heard herself say. I knew it from the moment you saved Ginny from the Chamber of Secrets, and maybe even before that. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the enormity of the mistake she had made and the hurt she had inflicted. It broke her heart. It broke Arthur's when they were shown a similar scene. Harry had sought out Arthur in a shed, and Arthur had not turned him away. In fact, it looked as though both men were entirely comfortable, almost like father and son.